Billionaire's wife slaps black CEO on camera. Seconds later, she kills $850 EM deal live. Hello everyone, before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. She doesn't belong here. The words didn't drift. They struck. And before the echo could settle beneath the crystal chandeliers, the slap came. Sharp. Public. Deliberate. Gasps snapped through the ballroom like glass cracking under pressure. Champagne flutes froze mid-air. A violinist missed a note. Dozens of phones lifted instinctively, their screens glowing against gold-trimmed walls and silk gowns. At the center of it all stood a woman in a soft rose evening dress, minimal sculpted, unbranded elegance. Her head tilted slightly from the impact. A red imprint bloomed against her cheek, but she did not stumble. Across from her, wrapped in navy satin and generational entitlement, stood the billionaire's wife. Jaw tight, eyes blazing, diamonds flashing beneath the chandelier light. "You aren't welcome here," she repeated louder this time for the donors, the board members, the press. The Grand Meridian Ballroom had hosted senators, tech moguls, royalty. Tonight it was hosting the signing of an $850 million acquisition that would merge legacy wealth with new market innovation. Everyone important was in the room, and everyone was watching. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now back to her. Her name was Dr. Amara Cole, 42-2, founder, investor, architect of one of the fastest growing infrastructure funds in the country. But tonight she had arrived alone. No security detail, no logo heavy designer clutch, no announcement.
Just a quiet entrance through gilded doors and a calm scan of the room. She had been speaking moments earlier with the billionaire himself, Charles Whitmore.
A measured conversation about compliance structures and long-term control clauses. Nothing flirtatious. Nothing improper. Just business. But optics in rooms like this were currency. And power, when threatened, often lashes out. Whitmore's wife had watched from across the ballroom, misreading proximity as ambition.
Mistaking presence for intrusion.
And now, here they stood. Amara lifted her fingers gently to her cheek. Not in shock. In assessment. The room wasn't silent anymore. It was charged. A hedge fund manager whispered, "Isn't that a junior associate?" Murmured, "I've seen her name in the deck." A socialite hissed under her breath, "This is going to ruin the evening." But Amara didn't look at them. She looked at the woman who had just struck her. Her posture remained flawless. Shoulders square, chin level, eyes steady. She had seen that look before. At 16, when a country club receptionist asked if she was lost. At 23, when a venture partner told her she was too early for rooms like this. At 31, when a private equity board questioned whether she was the face investors expect. Different chandeliers. Same ceiling. The billionaire's wife stepped closer. "Security can escort you out," she said, voice trembling with a confidence that didn't feel stable. Across the marble floor, two guards shifted but hesitated, because something wasn't adding up. Because Amara wasn't shrinking. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't angry. She was still. And stillness in a room built on dominance is terrifying. Charles Whitmore finally stepped forward. "Let's calm down," he muttered, more concerned with optics than justice. But Amara spoke before he could regain control. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "You just assaulted a principal stakeholder in tonight's deal. The words moved through the ballroom slower than the slap, but they hit harder. Ripple. Then another. Phones angled closer. Somewhere near the stage, a board member's face drained of color. Because suddenly, this wasn't a jealous outburst. It was a financial event. The billionaire's wife laughed. Short. Sharp. Disbelieving. That's ridiculous. Amara's gaze didn't waver. No theatrics. No raised tone. Just one controlled breath. And the faintest hint of something inevitable forming behind her eyes. The ballroom lights shimmered. But the room had already shifted. And this was only the first minute. The billionaire's wife laughed. Short. Bright. Brittle. That's absurd, she said, glancing around for validation. Charles, please tell me this woman is joking. Charles Whitmore didn't answer immediately, because he was looking at Amara differently now. Not as a guest, not as a disruption, but as a variable he might have underestimated. The orchestra had stopped entirely. The soft hum of networking chatter was gone. In its place, whispers. I know that name. She runs Cole Infrastructure. Wait, wasn't she in the acquisition brief? A man near the stage subtly pulled out his phone. His thumb moved fast across the screen, opening the internal deal memo circulated earlier that week. Amara Cole, lead capital partner. Conditional authority clause 14 override. His face changed. Across the ballroom, a young analyst, barely 32 junior to speak, but too smart not to notice, leaned toward a colleague. If she pulls out, the leverage collapses. The wife heard none of that. She stepped closer again, invading space like dominance alone could rewrite contracts. You don't walk into a legacy event and start claiming ownership, she snapped. This isn't some startup mixer. Amara didn't move back. Her voice remained level. Controlled. I didn't claim ownership, she said. I funded it. The sentence didn't rise. It landed. Charles felt the shift first, because he understood numbers, and he understood exposure. Let's take this somewhere private, he muttered, lowering his voice. Damage control. But privacy was gone. Half the room had their phones out now. Not filming for gossip, but checking stock alerts, internal emails, live market reactions, and overseas exchanges still open. The acquisition announcement had been pre-leaked to select investors, and markets were watching. Amara reached for her phone. No theatrics. No trembling hands. Just a precise tap. Somewhere 3 blocks away, in a quiet office overlooking the city, her executive assistant, Lena Brooks, straightened in her chair. Dr. Cole status, Amara said calmly. Board is monitoring the live feed. Legal is on standby. Clause 14 remains dormant. Prepare activation. A visible flicker of panic crossed Charles's face. Now hold on. Amara's gaze met his. Your household just turned a strategic partnership into a liability. The billionaire's wife scoffed again, but it sounded thinner now. You can't destroy an $850 million deal over a misunderstanding. Amara tilted her head slightly. It wasn't a misunderstanding. She touched her cheek once more, the faint redness still visible under chandelier light. It was an assault. Silence expanded outward. Security, who moments earlier had shifted toward her, now stood uncertain, awaiting direction that wasn't coming. Because authority in the room had begun to rearrange itself. The young analyst near the stage swallowed hard and said louder than he meant to, if Clause 14 triggers, the Whitmore Group loses controlling interest. That did it. A full ripple. Charles turned sharply. Who told you that? But he already knew. He had signed the documents. He just hadn't expected her to ever use them. Amara's phone buzzed softly in her hand. Markets reacting. Lena's voice came through. Speculation trending. Do you want me to proceed? Amara didn't answer immediately. She scanned the ballroom once at the donors, the board, the cameras, the woman who had believed power was inherited. Then she spoke. Stand by. Not yet, but close. The pause stretched longer than anyone expected. Amara lowered her phone but didn't put it away. The ballroom no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. Charles Whitmore exhaled slowly, recalculating. Amara, he said carefully, testing her name in public for the first time that night. Let's be rational. Emotions are high. Mine aren't, she replied. That landed harder than shouting would have. Across the room, a board member finally stepped forward, Elliot Graves, gray-haired, meticulous, the kind of man who read every footnote twice. I think Elliot said voice tight, we need clarity. All eyes shifted to him. He turned to Charles. Did we or did we not structure the acquisition around Dr. Cole's capital injection? Charles hesitated. Because the answer wasn't symbolic. It was structural. Yes, he admitted quietly. 38%. A murmur moved through the crowd like wind through silk. 38% wasn't ceremonial money. It was leverage. The billionaire's wife blinked confusion, cracking through indignation. 38% of what the controlling bloc Elliot answered, not looking at her. Silence again. And this time, it wasn't charged. It was unstable. Amara remained still, watching the room absorb the math. 17 years earlier, she had stood outside a hotel ballroom in Atlanta, listening through closed doors as donors inside toasted scholarships she helped fund without knowing her name. She remembered standing there, invitation in hand, being told the event was private. Tonight, she had been invited, funded the evening,
Structured the merger.
and still told she didn't belong. The symmetry wasn't lost on her. Charles stepped closer, lowering his voice again. We can fix this, he said. My wife acted out of turn. Out of turn, Amara repeated softly. His wife stiffened. I was defending this family. From what? Amara asked calmly. Capital, a few nervous laughs broke out quickly, swallowed. Phones weren't just checking alerts anymore. They were recording, not gossip. Evidence. And the young analyst's screen lit up again. A financial news account had already posted Whitmore Cole deal faces uncertainty amid gala incident. Speculation spreads fast when money trembles. Lena's voice came through Amara's phone once more, low and efficient. Trending on 3 platforms. Legal advises activation strengthens your position. Amara turned slightly away from the crowd, though every camera followed. Time, she asked. Less than 2 minutes before overseas markets fully priced the risk. Charles heard that. And for the first time that evening, real fear replaced social embarrassment. You would destabilize an entire merger over a slap, he demanded. Amara faced him fully. You destabilized it, she corrected. The billionaire's wife looked around the ballroom, searching for loyalty, for outrage on her behalf. But what she found instead were cautious investors, concerned donors, and a room that had begun to distance itself from her. Security, who had once edged toward Amara, now stood subtly between her and the stage, as if protecting the asset, not the host. Power had shifted. Not loudly, but definitively. Amara lifted her phone again. Lena, she said, voice steady. Open the document. A soft confirmation came through. Clause 14. Override authority. Single signature withdrawal. The ballroom lights shimmered overhead. And for the first time that night, the billionaire's wife understood something irreversible. This room didn't belong to her. It belonged to whoever controlled the outcome. And that decision was now resting in the hand she had just struck. Clause 14 hovered on her screen. A single paragraph buried deep in a 73-page agreement. Dry language.
Surgical consequences. Single signature withdrawal.
Immediate capital freeze. Automatic suspension of controlling vote. One tap and the Whitmore legacy would tilt. The billionaire's wife took a step back now, the earlier fire in her eyes replaced with something thinner. "This is insane," she whispered. "You're bluffing." Amara didn't answer her. She was looking at Charles. Because this had never really been about the wife. It was about governance. "You structured the deal so my capital stabilized your debt exposure," Amara said evenly. "You needed my liquidity to secure regulatory confidence." Charles swallowed. "We negotiated that in good faith." "And I entered in good faith," she replied. A beat. "You broke that faith." The room felt smaller somehow. Tight. Air thinner beneath chandeliers that suddenly looked ornamental instead of powerful. Across the ballroom, Elliot Graves checked his tablet again. "If she pulls the capital, the bridge financing collapses," he muttered to another board member. "We'd trigger default clauses within 48 hours. Default. Tall. The word didn't echo loudly. It sank. The billionaire's wife looked at her husband, confused. Default on what Charles didn't answer immediately. Because explaining leverage ratios and overextended positions in front of donors wasn't part of the evening's program. Amara stepped forward, not aggressively but decisively. The crowd parted without realizing they had moved. "I didn't come here to destroy anything," she said. "I came to build." She paused, letting the words sit. "But I don't fund environments that mistake dignity for weakness." A subtle tremor moved through the investors closest to the stage. Some had daughters. Some had fought their own battles in rooms like this. Phones continued recording. Not for spectacle anymore. For accountability. The young analyst, brave now that the math was public, spoke again. "Clause 14 was designed for reputational risk," he said quietly. "Public misconduct qualifies." Charles shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass. But it was too late. The framework had already been exposed. Amara's phone buzzed again. "Legal confirms," Lena said. "Given the incident occurred at an official corporate function and his documented activation is defensible." Defensible. That was the difference. This wasn't revenge. It was governance. The billionaire's wife straightened, gathering what remained of her composure. "You would humiliate us in our own ballroom." Amara met her eyes. "You did that first." No raised voice. No trembling edge. Just fact. Charles ran a hand through his hair, calculation replacing pride. "If we issue a public apology, it won't erase the precedent," Amara said. He knew she was right. Markets didn't react to apologies. They reacted to risk. A notification buzzed across multiple devices at once. Whitmore Holdings volatility alert. A ripple of screens lit the room like silent lightning. Speculation had begun pricing uncertainty. And uncertainty is expensive. Amara inhaled once, slow measured. 17 years ago, she had stood outside that hotel ballroom in Atlanta, invisible to the very people using her capital. She had promised herself something that night: never again. Never stand quietly in rooms built with her own money. She looked at Charles one final time. "This isn't about a slap," she said softly. "It's about standards." Her thumb hovered over the screen. "Clause 14. Activate. Bait." The ballroom waited, breathless. Because everyone understood now the future of an $850 million empire was balanced on the hand they had tried to dismiss. Her thumb moved. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just precise. Activate. The screen dimmed for half a second, then refreshed. Clause 14 executed. Capital withdrawal initiated. Board notification sent. Across the ballroom, a wave of vibration rippled through tailored jackets and jeweled clutches as phones buzzed in near unison. Elliot Graves stared at his tablet. "Oh, no," he breathed.
Charles's phone lit up next.
Emergency board session triggered. Liquidity exposure alert. He didn't need to read further. He felt it. The ground hadn't physically shifted, but the power in the room had. The billionaire's wife looked between them, confused, then impatient. "What did she do?" she demanded. Charles didn't answer, because in that moment the math was louder than pride. Without Amara's 38% capital injection, the bridge financing underwriting the acquisition no longer held. The regulatory approval tied to her firm's risk rating would be reassessed by morning. Investors were already reacting. Across the room, whispers sharpened into sentences. She pulled it. "Is this real check the market feed?" A financial correspondent near the bar refreshed his screen and exhaled sharply. Whitmore Holdings down 4% in after-hours trading. 4%. In minutes. The billionaire's wife took a step toward Amara, fury reigniting now that fear had arrived. "You just cost us millions," she hissed. Amara didn't flinch. "No," she said calmly. "You did. The sentence cut cleaner than the slap ever had. Security, who had once prepared to escort her out, now stood still, instinctively repositioned closer to her side than the host's authority had recalibrated itself. Charles stepped forward again, urgency replacing arrogance. "This can still be reversed," he said quickly. "We can issue a joint statement. We can frame this as a misunderstanding." Amara looked at him carefully. "This was not a misunderstanding," she replied. "It was a demonstration of how easily respect was withheld, of how quickly power was misjudged." Lena's voice returned through the phone, steady as ever. "Capital freeze, confirmed. Legal has documented the incident footage. You are fully protected." Protected. That word carried weight. Amara finally slipped the phone back into her clutch. No applause followed. No cinematic cheers. Just the heavy realization of consequence settling over silk and marble. The young analyst who had spoken earlier whispered to a colleague she just shifted the control structure. Not emotionally. Structurally. The billionaire's wife's composure cracked completely now. "You humiliated us in front of everyone." Amara met her gaze one last time. "You mistook silence for permission," she said quietly. "That was your last mistake." The orchestra, uncertain whether to resume, remained frozen. Charles stared at the screens, calculating damage control strategies that were already too late. Volatility alerts continued blinking across devices like distant lightning. And Amara, still poised, still unshaken, adjusted the strap of her gown, as if preparing to leave a meeting that had simply concluded. Because for her, it had. The deal wasn't destroyed out of anger. It was withdrawn out of principle. And in a ballroom built on inherited power, a new standard had just been set. Without a raised voice. Without chaos. Just one decision. And the room would never feel the same again. No one clapped. No one moved. The ballroom remained suspended in that strange space between spectacle and consequence.
Charles Whitmore was the first to physically shift.
He stepped away from his wife, not dramatically, not consciously, but instinctively. Like a man distancing himself from a fire he didn't start but would now have to explain.
His phone buzzed again.
Board member requesting immediate call. Lead bank seeking clarification. He declined both. Across the room, Elliot Graves was already dialing into the emergency session. His voice, once ceremonial and warm for donors, had turned clipped and procedural. "We've entered a liquidity event," he said quietly into his headset. "Yes. It's triggered." "No, this is not contained." Contained. Nothing about this felt contained anymore. The billionaire's wife looked around the ballroom as if searching for applause that would validate her earlier dominance. She found none. Instead, she found avoidance. Donors who had been smiling minutes ago were now subtly turning their bodies away. Investors who once hovered for proximity were stepping back to protect their portfolios. Social power evaporates quickly when financial gravity shifts. "You're overreacting," she said, though the words lacked conviction now. It was a slap. Amara turned slowly. "Yes," she agreed. "It was. A simple acknowledgement. Then she stepped closer, not threatening, not aggressive, but direct. At 16, she said calmly, I was escorted out of a ballroom I helped fund because someone decided I didn't look like I belonged. The room stilled again. Not because of the money this time, because of the memory. I told myself that night, she continued, that if I ever had the power to change that dynamic, I would. She let the sentence breathe. This is me keeping that promise. The billionaire's wife's lips parted, but no defense came. There is no strategy against lived experience delivered without anger. Charles rubbed his temples. Amara, we can renegotiate, he tried. We can rebuild the structure. You can rebuild your structure, she corrected gently, but not with my capital. Lena's voice vibrated once more from her phone, brief, efficient. Press coverage escalating. Narrative favors you. Would you like a prepared statement? Amara didn't hesitate this time. No statement, she said softly. The footage is enough. Footage. Every phone in the room suddenly felt heavier. Because history doesn't just record outcomes. It records behavior. The young analyst near the stage swallowed and said what many were thinking. She didn't just pull funding, he murmured. She pulled legitimacy. That was the true fracture. The deal had been marketed as progressive, forward-thinking, inclusive, and yet under chandelier light its foundation had revealed something older. Something brittle. Security shifted again, this time opening a clear path toward the exit without being asked. Not to remove her. To respect her departure. The billionaire's wife stood alone now in the center of a room that no longer mirrored her confidence. You destroyed our future, she said faintly. Amara paused at the edge of the ballroom and looked back. No, she replied evenly. I protected mine. Then she walked. No rush. No entourage. Just measured steps across marble that echoed louder than applause ever could. Behind her, volatility alerts continued flashing. Emergency calls were connecting. Board members were scrambling. But the standard had already been raised. And in a room built on inherited dominance, something irreversible had just occurred. Power had answered back. Quietly and decisively. The doors closed behind her with a muted thud. Inside, the ballroom remained frozen in the aftermath. Outside, the night air was cool, cleaner than the air she had just left behind. Amara didn't stop walking. Behind her, through the tall glass panels, she could see silhouettes moving faster now. Board members clustered. Charles pacing. His wife standing still, isolated in a widening circle of space. Her phone buzzed again. Markets reacting harder, Lena said. Down 8% now. Analysts citing governance instability. Governance instability. Not scandal. Not drama. Structure. Amara reached the base of the marble steps leading down from the venue. Camera flashes flickered faintly from across the street where it had traveled faster than the valet line. You're trending, Lena added. Clips of the slap are circulating. Commentary is framing it as executive misconduct. Amara exhaled slowly. Make sure legal archives everything she said. No commentary from us. Understood. Inside the ballroom, Charles Whitmore finally found his voice. This can't go public like this, he said sharply to Elliot Graves. We need containment. Elliot didn't look up from his screen. It's already public. Across social platforms, the clip was spreading. Not just the slap, but the sequence after. The stillness. The activation. The market alerts. A caption under one repost read, "You told her she didn't belong." Turns out she owned the leverage. The billionaire's wife's hands trembled slightly now, though she tried to hide it by clutching her champagne glass. They'll understand, she insisted to no one in particular. It was emotional. No, Elliot said quietly. It was documented. Documentation changes everything. One of the younger board members spoke carefully. If we don't address the culture issue immediately, rating agencies will downgrade us. culture issue. The phrase felt clinical, but lethal. Outside, Amara paused at the curb as her car pulled forward. For a brief moment, she looked back up at the ballroom windows glowing against the night. 17 years ago, she had stood outside looking in. Tonight, she walked away by choice. Her phone vibrated once more. "Board has formally acknowledged your withdrawal," Lena said. "They're requesting emergency renegotiation." Amara opened the car door. "They're requesting stability," she corrected. She slid into the back seat. "And stability requires respect." The door closed softly. Inside the ballroom, the music never resumed. Inside the car, the city lights blurred past like distant constellations. One slap had echoed. But the real impact wasn't the sound. It was the silence that followed when everyone realized power no longer looked the way they assumed it did. And somewhere between marble floors and market alerts, a precedent had just been rewritten. Not loudly, but permanently. By midnight, the narrative had hardened. Not as gossip, as precedent. Inside the Whitmore penthouse overlooking the city, every television glowed with some version of the same headline: gala altercation sparks. $850 M deal collapse, lead investor withdraws after public incident. Charles Whitmore stood near the window, jacket off, tie, loosened phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, I understand exposure," he said tightly. "No, we didn't anticipate activation." Across the room, his wife sat rigid on the edge of a velvet chair, replaying the clip on her screen. The slap. The stillness. The sentence you mistook silence for permission. Each time she watched it, the room behind her in the video seemed larger and she seemed smaller. She hadn't expected consequences. She had expected compliance. Back across town, Amara sat in her office, floor-to-ceiling windows, quiet skyline, no chandeliers required. Lena stood across from her desk, tablet in hand. "Requests for interviews are stacking," Lena said. "Major networks, financial press, even governance panels." Amara shook her head once. "No press tour." Lena nodded. "Understood?" A soft chime interrupted them. "Incoming call, Elliot Graves." Amara accepted. His voice sounded older now, less ceremonial. "Dr. Cole," he began carefully, "the board is prepared to issue a formal apology and request reinstatement talks." "An apology to whom?" Amara asked. A pause. "To you." "That's insufficient," she replied evenly. Another pause, longer this time. "What would be sufficient?" Elliot asked. Amara stood and walked toward the window, the city lights reflecting faintly in the glass. "Structural reform," she said. "Independent oversight. Mandatory governance review. Public acknowledgement that culture risk nearly destabilized an $850 million transaction." Elliot inhaled slowly. "That's extensive." "So was the exposure," she replied. Silence stretched between them, not hostile, just sober. Finally, Elliot said, "If we agree, would you reconsider the capital?" Amara turned slightly, gaze steady, though he couldn't see her. "I will consider reinvestment," she said, "if the structure reflects the standard I require." Not revenge. Not ego. Standard. Back in the penthouse, Charles ended another call and looked at his wife. "They want reform," he said quietly. Her jaw tightened. Over a slap, he didn't answer immediately, because he had begun to understand something she hadn't yet. "It wasn't the slap," he said finally. "It was what it revealed." Across the city, market analysts continued dissecting the event, not as drama, but as case study. Governance failure. Cultural blind spots. Concentration risk. And at the center of it all was a woman who had walked into a ballroom alone and walked out having redefined its hierarchy. Not with volume, not with spectacle, but with a single documented decision. The story was no longer about humiliation. It was about standards. And standards, once raised, don't lower easily. By morning, the story had moved beyond the ballroom. It was no longer a viral clip. It was a boardroom reckoning. Financial news panels replayed the footage beside scrolling tickers. Analysts dissected the sequence frame by frame, not the slap itself, but what followed. The stillness. The activation. The market response. Textbook governance leverage, one commentator said. An example of capital enforcing cultural accountability, another added. Across social media, a different sentence was trending. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. In Whitmore headquarters, the emergency board session had stretched into its 6th hour. Elliot Graves adjusted his glasses and addressed the room. "We are not here because of volatility," he said. "We are here because we ignored a structural risk." No one argued. Because the numbers were visible. The downgrade warnings. The investor hesitation. The capital vacuum. Charles sat at the end of the long glass table, shoulders heavier than they had been at the gala. "We comply," he said finally. "Independent oversight. Governance audit. Public statement." A murmur of agreement followed. Not enthusiastic. Necessary. Across town, Amara reviewed the formal proposal on her tablet. Independent Review Board. Mandatory Executive Conduct Policy. Public acknowledgement of the incident. Binding inclusion standards at all corporate functions. Lena looked up. They moved fast. They had to, Amara replied. Capital doesn't wait for pride. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message from Elliot. The board has unanimously approved the reforms. We request a meeting at your discretion. Unanimous. That was new. Amara walked slowly through her office, pausing near the framed photo on the shelf, 16 years old, standing outside that Atlanta ballroom, in a simple dress holding an envelope that changed her future. She touched the frame lightly. Then she typed her reply. I will meet. But not to restore what was. To define what will be. Send. Back at Whitmore headquarters, Charles read the message and exhaled. She's not coming back, as before, one board member said quietly. No, Charles agreed. She's coming back stronger. Outside the windows, the market bell signaled the official opening. Whitmore Holdings dipped briefly, then stabilized. Not fully recovered, but steadying. Because uncertainty had been addressed, not hidden. Across the city, Amara closed her tablet. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about spectacle. It was about precedent. And precedent once set rewrites rooms long after the music stops. The ballroom lights would shine again someday, but they would never illuminate the same hierarchy. Because one woman had refused to leave quietly. And instead of asking to belong, she redefined the terms. The meeting was set for noon. Not at the Whitmore headquarters. Not in the Grand Meridian Ballroom. At Amara's office. Location matters when power recalibrates. By the time Charles and two board members stepped into the glass-walled conference room overlooking the city, the shift was unmistakable. No chandeliers. No velvet drapes. Just steel light and silence. Amara entered last. No dramatic pause. No entourage. Just control. They stood as she approached the table. That detail didn't go unnoticed. Charles spoke first. We've implemented the reforms exactly as outlined. A folder slid across the table, formal documentation signed and notarized. Independent Oversight Committee established. Executive Conduct Policy codified. Mandatory governance training scheduled. Public statement drafted and approved. Amara opened the folder and reviewed the pages calmly. No rush. No visible satisfaction. Just evaluation. Your statement, she said, evenly acknowledges that executive behavior nearly destabilized a transaction due to cultural negligence. Yes, Elliot confirmed. It does. And the Oversight Board has authority beyond advisory status binding authority, Charles replied. She closed the folder. Silence lingered, not tense, just waited. You understand, she said, looking directly at Charles, this isn't about reputation recovery? He nodded slowly. It's about structure. It's about predictability, she corrected. Investors fund predictability, a beat, and respect. The word hung in the air without accusation. Charles inhaled. Will you reinstate the capital? Amara considered him carefully. I will re-enter under amended terms, she said. 40% equity. Dual signature override on any governance breach. The board members exchanged a glance. Higher stake. Stronger control. Charles hesitated only a second. Agreed. There it was. No raised voices. No celebration. Just acknowledgement of a new reality. Amara extended her hand across the table. Charles shook it. This time he understood what he was shaking. Not charity. Not optics. Leverage. Outside the windows, the city moved forward as it always did. But inside that room, something had shifted permanently. A ballroom had tried to dismiss her. A contract had restored balance. And now the merger would proceed not under inherited dominance, but under negotiated standard. The music hadn't resumed that night, but the structure had been rebuilt. On her terms. The public statement went live at 3:07 p.m. Not vague. Not diluted. Whitmore Holdings acknowledges executive misconduct at a corporate function that compromised investor confidence. We are implementing binding governance reforms effective immediately. No euphemisms. No misunderstandings. Financial media picked it up within minutes. This is rare, one anchor noted. A controlling family publicly admitting cultural liability tied to capital structure. Stock stabilized further. Not soaring, but grounded. Inside Amara's office, Lena refreshed the feed and allowed herself a small nod. They followed through, she said. They followed incentive, Amara replied calmly. Respect backed by leverage tends to be sincere. Across town in the Whitmore penthouse, the billionaire's wife watched the statement scroll across her screen. Her name wasn't mentioned, but the implication was unmistakable. She turned off the television. The silence in the room felt heavier than the ballroom had. Charles stood by the window again, but this time his posture was different. Less defiant. More reflective. You underestimated her, his wife said quietly. Charles didn't correct her. We underestimated the cost of disrespect, he replied. That distinction mattered. Back at headquarters, the Independent Oversight Board convened for the first time. Diverse, experienced, empowered beyond ceremony. Policy wasn't a brochure anymore. It was binding. And in financial circles, the story had already shifted tone. What began as scandal was now cited as case study. A lesson in governance risk. A reminder that optics without structure are fragile. Proof that capital is not passive. That evening, Amara returned to her office alone. She paused again at the framed photograph of her 16-year-old self outside that Atlanta ballroom. The girl in the picture had looked uncertain, excluded. Small. Amara studied the image for a long moment. You belong, she said softly, not to the room, not to the press, but to memory itself. Her phone buzzed one last time. Meeting request confirmed. Merger proceeding under amended terms.
She set the phone down.
The ballroom lights would shine again soon. The merger would close. Markets would move on. But something had been permanently altered. Not just in one company. In one room. In one narrative. Silence when backed by structure is not weakness. It is strategy. And strategy when executed reshapes power without ever needing to shout. The merger closed 90 days later. No gala. No chandeliers. No champagne towers stacked for photographs. Just signatures. Digital confirmations. Regulatory clearance. 40% equity transferred under amended terms. Dual signature governance override embedded permanently. Independent oversight activated with binding authority. Structure. That was the real celebration. Financial press called it one of the most disciplined investor recoveries of the year. Governance panels dissected the case in quiet conference rooms. Business schools requested transcripts, but Amara declined interviews. She wasn't interested in becoming a symbol. She was interested in setting precedent. On the evening the deal finalized, she returned briefly to the Grand Meridian Ballroom. Not for spectacle. For symmetry? The space was empty now. Staff resetting tables for another event. Chandeliers dimmed to maintenance glow. She walked across the marble floor, slowly, heels echoing in the hollow quiet. This time, no one questioned her presence. No one needed to. At the center of the room, she paused. 17 years ago, she had stood outside a ballroom like this, excluded from the capital she helped enable. 90 days ago, she had stood inside one struck, dismissed, underestimated. Now she stood here by choice. Not to prove she belonged, but to remember she always had. Behind her, the doors opened softly. Charles stepped inside, alone. No hostility in his posture now. No defensiveness. "Congratulations," he said.
She didn't turn immediately.
"This wasn't about winning," she replied calmly. He nodded. "I know." A beat of shared understanding. "Your standards changed our structure," he admitted. Amara finally faced him. "They protected mine." Silence settled between them, not heavy, not tense. "Resolve all." Charles extended his hand again. This time, it wasn't about leverage. It was acknowledgement. She shook it briefly. Then she looked once more at the vast ceiling overhead, the same ceiling that had once witnessed dismissal. And she spoke the final sentence without raising her voice. "I didn't need to belong in this room," she said evenly. "I was the reason it existed." No applause followed. No cameras flashed. Just truth. And in a world where power often confuses noise for strength, one thing had become unmistakably clear: she hadn't raised her voice. She had raised the standard, and that quietly, permanently was enough.